I like that this is a joint lecture between a school and a museum, an initiative that actually permeates traditional silos between what is learning, what is knowledge, experiential engagement, and to promote this active sort of active learning, but also critical thinking. As already Alistair and Constance mentioned, this talk is related to alternative histories of cybernetics, and yes, there is more than just cybersyn to this history. It's about how Latin America countries wrestled to use technology. And it's also about visions of how to move from banana exporters, from banana republics to software exporters. The histories that I'm gonna tell also show that what has happened this week with, early this week with the Chinese AI company and app DeepSeek, which performed very well against Western AI models such as ChatGPT, at a fraction of cost, at a fraction of energy, happened already in the past. Chips, hardware, energy are not as critical to develop a high-functioning technology as we thought. And history repeats itself. Today's technology may be a kind of utopia, but it can go both ways, to develop a better society or to fulfill totalitarian desires of politicians and businessmen. To give a background, my initial impulse to research the history of cybernetics in Latin America was because I recognized its distinct epistemological foundation, which weren't merely the application of Western ideas, but original thoughts integrating technology to respond to local context. I see these, we can spot that in Argentinian computer pioneer Manuel Sadowski and his Marxist-influenced vision of computation as a tool for liberation and autonomy. He set up the first two schools to teach computation, first in Argentina and then in Uruguay. Or in the Chilean architect and artist Juan Downey's conception of cybernetics as a means to enhance human cognition while preserving indigenous knowledge systems. Or the Bariloche Foundation in under Latin American World Model, which proposed an alternative development to MIT's Limits of Growth report focused on basic needs, satisfaction, and social equality. And these are only a few examples, but they reinforce my argument that Western frameworks were not and are insufficient for understanding the world. That brought me to initiate this project, which started co-editing a special issue on the history of cybernetics in Latin America for AI and Society, a more academic project. But that history illustrated the dynamics and the networks during the 60s and the 70s in Latin America, which nurtured some pioneering projects in relation to computation, cybernetics, management, society, and culture. I learned a lot from this experience. And these are also some shots from a recent exhibition I co-curated along with Gabriela Urteaga and Rodrigo Alonso, currently on display at the MOLA, the Museum of Latin American Art in LA, as part of Getty's Pacific Standard Time Arts and Science Collide, which depicts also a group of contemporary artists working on art and technology in Latin America, along with a group of pioneers, including Swiss-Peruvian Francesco Mariotti, who we have the honor of having him here tonight. But the history of art and technology in Latin America can hardly be understood solely from the perspective of the history of art. To understand it, it's necessary to build and interweave it with the history of cybernetics and computation. This is the Cybersyn's Opsroom chair. It's, as already mentioned by Alistair, it's part of the multi-mode metagame research and installation developed by Catalina Osa and Enrique Rivera, originally produced for ZKM's user, The Century of the Consumer exhibition, and currently on view as part of the Fellow Travelers exhibition. The Opsroom chair is a replica of the original design, actually by the Faculty of Industrial Design at the HFG here, And the installation is a non-linear narrative that combines historical events with the new possible concepts and aesthetics proposed by Project Cybersyn. This pioneering system designed by Stafford Beer, we will talk in a moment about that, is a pioneer project designed for Salvador Allende's Chilean government that aimed to manage and control the nationalized companies of Chile's economy. But Cybersyn's chair is a part of the operation room. It was an octagonal room featuring visual displays of slide projectors with real-time data. It was actually installed in the president's palace in Chile. But here lies what I could say it's the first problem. And Alistair already mentioned it, but by fetishizing the ops room, which is an amazingly beautiful, this was recently rebuilt in the palace, which is a cultural center, La Moneda, right now in Santiago de Chile. But by fetishizing the ops room, we tend to neglect that Cybersyn comprised of wider and much more complex setups of technologies that seem underrepresented in this history. These are just the main components of Cybersyn. Cybernet, which was a national network of telex machines that connected the factories to a central computer, enabling this sort of real-time communication and data transmission across Chile. Cyberstride, which was a statistical modeling software that processed industrial data and detected emerging problems or irregularities. Checo, which was or Chilean economy, which was an economic simulation program also to model and predict the behavior of Chilean economy and test different policy scenarios over a 10-year frame. So Cybersyn then it's more than that, and it's important to also put it in context. This is Stafford Beer. Cybersyn was conceived by a group of Chilean engineers, but it was led by Stafford Beer, British consultant who pioneered on management cybernetics. He had a very interesting career after serving the British Army, and perhaps that's why he get this idea of the ops room from his experience during his time in the Army. He then joined United Steel company where in the UK, where he established one of the first operational research and cybernetics department in the industry. In 1961, he founded a consulting firm called SIGMA, which specialized in cybernetics and operational research. The main research of Beer, from what Beer is best known, is for developing this beautifully drawn by him a model or diagram, which is a Bible system model, which is an organizational framework based on cybernetic principles and modeled after the human nervous system, consisting of 5 interconnected systems from, you will see there, 1, 2, you will see it from bottom up, which is also part of the concept of this model, which is a bottom-up model. System 1, which comprises operational units with relative autonomy in day-to-day activities, while the System 2 provides coordination between these units, preventing conflicts, managing the information flow. System 3, which oversees the operations and resource optimization. System 3, which scans the external environment and planning for adaptation, while System 5 sets the overall direction and maintains the organizational cohesion. A key feature of the BSM is its recursive nature. Each viable system contains and is contained by other systems, emphasizing information flows and feedback mechanisms, which are principles also from cybernetics, and aiming to achieve stability while maintaining freedom and adaptability at all levels without imposing rigid hierarchical control. But here we come up against a second problem, I would say. And we have already seen the history of cybernetics in Latin America is not just Cybersyn. The aesthetics of the ops room and its chair are so strong and has received significant attention in recent years in the media. that they voided us from seeing the relationships that beer developed in Latin America before and after Cybersyn, which are part of this rich history of cybernetics in the region that remains largely unexplored. While I was visiting the Stafford Beer collection at Liverpool John Moores University, I found that there was abundant documentation about beer's extensive work and influence across the region, both before and after Project Cybersyn. As we will see, by examining how beer's ideas were interpreted and implemented around different political regimes, we will provide new insight into the complex relationship between cybernetic thinking, state power, social transformation, and technological implementation. Moreover, the more I dig into this history, the more I realize that Latin American practitioners themselves didn't maintain rigid boundaries between the domains of culture, management, and technology, instead creating hybrid relations that responded to local needs while engaging with global technological developments. Getting back to this history, the first contact of beer with Chile was through SIGMA, his consulting firm. SIGMA was significantly involved through its work with the Compañía de Acero del Pacífico, the steel company in Chile, one of South America's largest steel producers. Though Beer refused to go himself because of his hectic schedule, he was very famous and very busy, he put together a team to travel to Chile, who worked at CAP for 20 months, optimizing processes and solving various management problems. They had other projects in Chile with the Chilean railways as well as potential businesses. And interestingly enough, during that period, Fernando Flores, then a student at the Catholic University of Chile, was hired by SIGMA, where he was introduced to Beer's cybernetic ideas through books like Cybernetics and Management and Decision and Control, which significantly influenced his thinking. This is very important because Fernando Flores was responsible of bringing Beer back to Chile for Project Cybersyn when he served as technical general manager for the Corfo, the organization that enabled Cybersyn to happen during Allende's government. However, besides Chile, SIGMA did struggle to expand its businesses in other Latin American countries. The main obstacle were SIGMA's high consultancy fees, but also the competition from North American companies that had financial backing from the Alliance for Progress and the Ford Foundation. Although SIGMA's work in Latin America does not provide a palpable perspective on the potential of management cybernetics in government, it is symptomatic that it was during these years that Beer developed a set of ideas coined as the Liberty Machine, in which he argued that cybernetics has a responsibility not only to awaken society to environmental and social threats, but also to provide the tools with which to solve them. For Beer, the failure of society was rooted in the mismatch shaped by traditional hierarchical, functionally divided, and top-down organizational structures, so starkly exemplified in the case of governments. Instead, the Liberty Machine was based on the BSM, on the Viable System model, and was advocating for a new kind of meta-system, characterized by a networked rather than a hierarchical structure, and action driven by information rather than by authority. The second story I want to introduce in a similar time frame as Project Cybersyn happened in Peru. The Center for the Study of People's Participation, or CENTRO, emerged from a radical vision by the Peru's revolutionary government of the armed forces, which sought to implement profound social and economic reforms. Brazilian anthropologist Darcy Ribeiro, who had been exiled from Brazil after 1964, after the military coup in 1964, founded CENTRO in 1972. This is a very interesting figure. He founded the first museum of indigenous cultures in the world. He founded the University of Brasilia. He was a creative mind, a social thinker and a creative mind. And he was very much influenced by Manuel Sadowski, who we talked before, the father of computation in Latin America. And together with Argentine mathematician Oscar Barsavsky, they both aimed to create a model of cybernetic socialism for Peru. Barsavsky developed computational models aimed at exploring societal transformation possibilities across resource availability, wealth distribution, and political viability. Rather than just predicting outcomes, Barsavsky's approach used numerical experimentation, which was a technique developed during the 50s and 60s after the Second World War, to devise possible models for development and social welfare. For Darcy Ribeiro, a social scientist, these computational experiments provided ways to visualize potential futures and viable utopias, particularly focused on meeting basic needs in Peru. The vision of CENTRO and the vision of Darcy Ribeiro was not about automating work or increasing production efficiency, but rather about abolishing asymmetrical power structures and developing new tools for societal governance in an increasingly complex world. Beer's ideas influenced CENTRO primarily through Carlos Sena Figueiredo, a Brazilian who had initially worked in Project Cybersyn with Beer. After fleeing Chile to Peru just the day of the coup, Sena brought Beer's cybernetic concepts to CENTRO, where he helped develop preliminary plans for a real-time enterprise information and control system similar to Cybersyn, as well as mechanisms for participation in enterprises to guarantee decision-making autonomy at all levels of the industry apparatus. At that time, the industries were nationalized, but differently to the case of Chile, they aimed to develop cooperatives. They aimed to create a social property sector. Sena Figueiredo also organized a presentation about Project Cybersyn for high-ranking officials and authored what is likely the world's first published text about Project Cybersyn, a 1974 book titled Planificación y Participación, Planification and Participation, Planning and Participation, published by CENTRO with an impressive print run of 5,000 copies, even for today's standards. Unfortunately, the untimely end of CENTRO after a new military coup came into power in 1975 and dismantled it was in part due to the lack of understanding and support from the military high commands. This highlights a recurring pattern in Latin America where visionary projects often succumb to short-term priorities and political myopia. Over the next decade, in the 80s, Latin American political and economic landscape underwent significant changes as countries grappled with the aftermath of military dictatorships, economic crises, and the growing influence of neoliberal policies promoted by multilateral US-based organizations. It was against this backdrop that Stafford Beer made a comeback to Latin America, as governments sought innovative ways to address new challenges and reform their public administration using Beer's cybernetic ideas and, of course, the viable system model, which offered a promising approach to introducing greater rationality, objectivity, and precision into policy-making processes. I will explore Beer's journey on 4 countries: Mexico, Uruguay, Venezuela, and Colombia. Just going to have a little bit of water. Beer spent a significant portion of 1982 and the whole 1983 in Mexico, initially by invitation of Javier Livas, an attorney, cybernetician, and right-wing politician, interestingly enough. Beer was involved in a project that aimed at addressing the issue of food wasting or food wastage in the country, a problem that stems from inadequate logistics, transportation, and shipping infrastructure, which often leads to spoiling before it reaches the market. The project sought to optimize the existing infrastructure, potentially alter the choice of products to those more resilient during shipping, and ultimately reduce food waste in a nation where it was sorely needed. However, the endeavor faced significant challenges due to the widespread corruption in the country, which allocated funds often disappearing into the pockets of state workers referred to as aviators or aviadores, hindering the project's process. In a memo addressed to the Mexican president, Miguel de la Madrid Hurtado, here he is with a similar way in which Musk was addressing last week in the media in the US. In a public memo addressed to Mexican President Miguel de la Madrid, Beer illustrated the use of the viable system model to diagnose and address systemic governance failure. His analysis reveals how institutional structures can actively resist transformation even when there is seemingly political will for change. The memo illustrates that what Beer called structural dysfunction, which manifests in the government incapacity to adapt to changing circumstances. Beer observes that this creates a vicious cycle where institutions become increasingly dysfunctional, producing what he called a cancerous bureaucratic growth. Most significantly, Beer identifies how institutional designs were actively generating undesired outcomes, demonstrating how these systems were perfectly designed to produce corruption and inefficiency, not as aberrations, but as natural outputs of their structural configuration. This aligns with Beer's famous dictum, the purpose of a system is what it does, not what it claims to do. After this disillusioning experience, Beer left Mexico and decided to emigrate permanently to Canada. In the case of Uruguay, after 12 years of civic military dictatorship, the new democratically elected President Julio María Sanguinetti needed daily, almost real-time information of critical variables to evaluate the country's situation, detect potential problems early, and make well-informed decisions. Uruguay Cibernética, or URUCIP, was an executive information system designed and implemented for the presidency of Uruguay. The system created a national data network incorporating cybernetic modeling, statistical techniques, and detect what Stafford Beer called incipient instabilities of the country's situation, focusing on detecting disruptive changes in macroeconomic time series data to provide early warnings, early alerts to the government. URUCIP had an intuitive graphical interface. Sadly, there are not many photos of that interface, or not very good photos. There was this infrared numerical keypad used by the president. It says there, Señor Presidente, and this allowed top-level decision makers to base their decisions on comprehensive information presented daily at a management center located at the president's office, similar to Project Cybersyn Option, but using digital technology. In the case of the Option, it was using slides. It was using projecting slides. Uruguayan engineer Victor Ganon, who was a project leader, hired Stafford Beer as an advisor. There is a very nice letter, the reply from Stafford Beer, where he said that he was waiting for that moment after Cybersyn for more than a decade. The viable system model here provided a way to derive indicators and detect instabilities in the country's situation in real time, and the project itself was founded on an extensive system integration. That was very important because it took into account, we need to take into account that during those years, many technologies were still deployed in silos, which included communication, computation, and data resources. The system included a statistical software called CyberFilter, which analyzed data streams against stored expectations to detect all these incipient instabilities early enough for managers to take corrective measures. The telex system implementation represented a significant advance over Chile's Cybersyn telex machines, since these were developed in Uruguay using sophisticated electronics and programming capabilities. According to Victor Ganon, Beer did not believe that the software needed to operate Urusip could be developed locally in Uruguay. For Beer's northern mindset, people from the south could not develop a state-of-the-art software. Interestingly, the success of Eurosif opened the way to being later exported, first to Argentina and then to Nicaragua. And it was the first software exported from Uruguay, which later became one of the most advanced Latin American and global countries in terms of software and technological development. Urusip was remarkably prescient in implementing principles that are now considered fundamental to modern information management systems, anticipating key features that would become standard decades later, like real-time monitoring, standardized taxonomies across organizations, interoperable systems, visual dashboards or data dashboards, and early warning detection systems through the cyber filter technology. While today's organizations routinely employ business intelligence dashboards and real-time analytics, Urusip was pioneering these approaches when most systems still relied on periodic reporting and siloed data structures. Perhaps more impressively, Urusip achieved this level of sophistication using 1980s technologies, demonstrating that innovative approaches to information management are not solely dependent on advanced hardware, but on conceptual frameworks that understand how effectively to organize and present information for human decision-making. Urusip represented, therefore, a significant milestone in the history of computation in Latin America. Unfortunately, the transition from President Sanguinetti to President Lacalle in 1990 marked a turning point for Urusip. The change in administration brought new priorities, a different perspective on how to manage the government information, and this shift in political support came at a particularly challenging time for Urusip, where it requires certain technical changes that evolve to evolve the software, along with the need to expand its network and external users and migrate its database. So the combination of the loss of political backing from the new administration and the withdrawal of the financial support for the project ultimately brought Urusip's pioneering journey in government information systems to an end, despite its proven success and international recognition. In the case of Venezuela, President Carlos Andrés Pérez's second mandate faced significant economic and social changes in this oil-rich country. Beer visited Venezuela thrice to discuss management cybernetics with President Pérez, and the potential implementation was called Cybervenes. Cybervenes project, which aimed at installing again a strategic decision room for the presidential cabinet. Similarly to the case of Urusip, this room was fed with information in real-time data using the cyber filter. So it was a sort of package that Stafford was already selling after the success of Urusip. The aim was to analyze vital items such as food supplies and national economic inflows with the aim to detect these incipient instabilities. To this end, the President office formed a cybernetic committee and an implementation team which developed flow charts on food chain information. But unfortunately, Venezuela's situation took a dramatic change. The oil prices plummeted, its economy contracted, and inflation soared, which led to the President Pérez to implement extremely severe IMF-baked austerity packages, which provoked the Caracazo in 1989, a series of widespread protests and riots in Caracas and other cities. And as a direct consequence of this unforeseen development, the president's ambitious Cyber Venice project never came to fruition and was gradually disbanded, meaning it was only a waste of time for Stafford Beer, who later, and this is a folder from the archive, he described it as a fiasco, waste of time. And finally, Colombia marked, I would say, the final engagement in Latin America with Stafford Beer, initiated through a disciple, Angela Espinosa, a Colombian engineer who met Beer while pursuing her PhD at Ashton University. And after becoming the Secretary of Informatics, Angela Espinosa, at the President's Office, she implemented several viable system model-based projects between 1993 and 2002 during the liberal technocratic presidencies of Cesar Gaviria and Ernesto Samper. From all the projects that were many, three significant projects emerged. A strategic information management developed as a performance management system for the Colombian Presidential Office using BSM and another methodology which was called B-Plan, which was actually developed by Fernando Flores in the US when he emigrated, with Terry Winograd, who was the teacher of the two founders of Google, by the way. This resulted into the Synergia project, which effectively monitored and developed KPIs for the government. Then the National Auditing Office, which was a project which introduced systemic auditing to improve the government's communications, while it enhanced auditing practices. Organizational change, unfortunately, in this case, remained a little bit limited. And then the National School System Redesign, which tried to break from the traditional approaches that came from multilateral organizations and adopted a more holistic cybernetic framework emphasizing stakeholder participation and local autonomy of the schools. It focused on transforming education through improved resource allocation and community engagement. In these cases, the application of the viable system model aimed to create more adaptive, transparent, and accountable systems. By reshaping the underlying structures and incentives that enable corruption, these projects sought to foster a culture of integrity and performance in the Colombian public sector. The relative continuity of two consecutive Liberal Party presidents deepened neoliberal policies, but provided a more favorable context for these long-term systemic interventions compared to more volatile situations in other countries in Latin America. We have already seen how Stafford Beer designed the viable system model on the basis of cybernetic principles that he considered to be universal, similar to the human nervous system. Through the cases discussed, it is possible to recognize that its implementation was always mediated through particular political, social, or even cultural contexts. The viable system model was not simply transferred, but actively translated according to local political needs and power structures, making it attractive to both progressive and technocratic agendas. The British sociologist of science, Andrew Pickering, argues that the viable system model was an intention of technical expert which accorded technical experts key position, which supports the technocratic narrative that nurtured during the 80s and the 90s, such as market efficiency or the privatization of core public services. In essence, taking control of the state and repurpose it to the benefit of private enterprises. From this neoliberal perspective, ideas from computation and cybernetics could also be applied to creating new systems to manage societies which aim at eroding states and the collective and delegating such responsibility to private enterprises and making citizens members of global digital platforms. From this perspective, the ability to ask important structural questions about how to reform society are lost. However, I think it would be overly simplistic to characterize the viable system model as purely technocratic, as such perspective overlooks several aspects of its design and implementation. What it is true is that the viable system model inherent design for democratic participation and local autonomy was appropriated by a pervasive top-down approach which runs counter to the original intentions of the model, which emphasize the importance of bottom-up processes in fostering organizational viability and adaptability. Latin America's engagement with Beer's ideas and cybernetics was not simply about technical efficiency or identifying societal threats, but about tools to address them through enhanced autonomy and participation. We saw that in the case of CENTRO, which went beyond mere technical implementation to embrace viable utopias. The belief that data, computational tools, and cybernetic principles could help identify and realize transformative social possibilities rather than simply optimizing existing structures. This approach saw technology not as an instrument of control, but as a means of expanding human potential and collective creativity. The goal is not to abandon reality for unattainable dreams, but to use cybernetic principles to expand what we understand as possible and achievable. This distinction is crucial. While technocracy implies rule by technical experts imposing predetermined and one-size-fits-all solutions, Latin American view of cybernetics often sought to create spaces for collective exploration at both the technical level and the decision-making level. The goal was not to prescribe ends from above, whether through market mechanisms or central planning, but to develop systems that could help governments discover and pursue their own evolving purposes. No wonder why Beer's late interest in the public sector, as well as his interest to modernize the state, could also be understood as a counter-response to the neoliberal policies at that time. Moreover, the case of Eurociv illuminates the fact that knowledge, innovation, and pioneering projects can be successfully developed in nations that are often labeled as underdeveloped and are frequently overlooked in terms of their potential to contribute to new global models. Bart van Steenbergen, in an article titled Global Modeling in the 90s, observes the decline in interest in solidarity, both within nations in the form of diminishing support to the welfare state, and externally in terms of the neglect of poorer nations, which provides a critical lens through which to understand this phenomena. The lack of solidarity and support not only hinders our ability to contribute to global progress, perpetuating a system of inequality that benefits only large global corporations and dominant players, but also neglects with utterly ignorance the brilliance and diverse contributions to the history of ideas, in this case to managerial cybernetics, that were produced in non-represented regions like Latin America. The cases I show today about the history of cybernetics in Latin America and in relation to Stafford Beer reveals that Project Cybersyn was not an isolated phenomenon, but rather one example among several innovative technological initiatives in the region. These projects challenged the image of Latin America as an exporter, as a banana republic as an exporter of raw materials, to one of a sophisticated software developer and technological innovator. Moreover, this reflection is particularly relevant in current times, where technological tools have the potential to democratize or concentrate power, depending on the political decisions guiding their use. We are seeing this today as a Silicon Valley model represented by Elon Musk, Trump, and a group of tech oligarchs who embody a form of technological centralization and autocratic control that Beer specifically warned against. The experiences of Stafford Beer in Latin America demonstrated that locally developed technological solutions could serve democratic purposes while maintaining autonomy from central control. What is particularly significant is how these projects of technological implementation intersected with Latin America's distinctive tradition of viable utopianism and broader aspiration for creative liberation and social transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was, I feel like I've done a whirlwind tour of South America in 30 years.
In 40 minutes.
Yeah, but it was excellent. Thank you. I mean, I think we can open up to questions if anybody has any. But I was quite interested to just hear from you a little bit about why South America, do you think? What are the preconditions for this fertile environment that I think is unique, right? It's on the kind of, if you look at the global history from the 1950s onwards.
I don't have a clear answer, but I can explain it through the journey of Darcy Ribeiro. Darcy Ribeiro lived with the Indians of Brazil 10 years as he was doing field work. Then he set up this Museum do Indio in Rio. He then created the University of Brasilia, imagine, created this university in the middle of nowhere, this very big planning project of Brasilia. He had to convince 200 faculty to come over to the middle of nowhere. And then I mean, there was this military coup, he had to leave. He became little by little Latin American because instead of going to Europe or to the US, he decided to stay in Latin America, but he had to move around. He had to move from Uruguay to Venezuela, then to Chile, and finally to Peru. I think he became Latin American. But also when he went to Peru and he realized that there was a possibility to develop this project along with Oscar Barsavsky, he said, well, Peru is a very complex country with a big Andean population, also a coastal population of, I mean, mestizos, Creole, white people, also people from the jungle. It's a little model of the complexity of Latin America. And I think that the answer is that Latin America is a very complex society, and the ideas of, but there's always hope there. There is always hope because, and we are talking a lot today about indigenous knowledge systems. We are respecting them in a different way because we know that these are technologies and knowledge systems that we cannot understand, perhaps. It's different from the reading 30 years ago. So I think there are lots of complexities that enable us to think creatively from there. And there are structural problems that we can never solve. So I think there is, I mean, it's not an answer, but it's at least it's a way of recognizing or trying to understand why.
I would like to ask you if you speculate a little bit. Do you have like a problem in mind what you would like to be solved with these ideas, like actual, like contemporary problem, or yeah?
Well, I'm not a politician. I'm not a civil servant. But I definitely think that technology is in the wrong hands. It's in the hands of, I mean, most of the digital platforms are in the hands of corporations, of people that, it's not like what happened in the 30s, 40s, 50s, that companies had a social purpose. As part of, they didn't require a department for corporate social responsibility. They were embedded with social purpose, as it was the case with universities. But everything has become specialized. Social purpose has become marketing in companies. if you see people, once more, going back, people like Aurelio Peccei, who created the Club of Rome, he was a manager in Olivetti and Fiat, and then he set up the Argentinian operation of Fiat, and there he set up a department for economic research, and that was the seat for the Club of Rome. So I'm just thinking that there needs to be more respect about the different practices, and we need to work together. Academia, I mean businesses, government, society. So I'm just very concerned about the specialization, the narrow views. I mean, the world is not just one way of looking at things, and I think that we need this much broader perspective. If we are consuming global social platforms that have a one-dimensional view, that's not going to solve any problem. Actually, that's going to try to create an individual that thinks the same, and this is not how society, how organisms evolve. Sorry if it was too complex, my answer, but yeah. So I don't have an answer in a way.
But you highlighted the key problem at the end as well, which is that no matter how much you create a kind of utopic system, once you insert that into a system that is not conducive to that, like the parent system that you're trying to infiltrate or change, will never create the conditions for that model to succeed. So it's like there's like it's like a sixth layer outside of Beer's five systems that will at the moment or won't allow that to happen, because it will always be, like you say, even corporate social responsibility as a culture now is really only designed around increasing the profits that enable the detrimental work that requires corporate social responsibility. It's a sort of vicious, it's itself a vicious cycle.
But it's very much connected to what Stafford Beer said. We need to redesign. We need to think about redesigning the structure.
Oh, I'm going to pass a mic so that you get translated.
We'll see how the translator does with my accent. It should be quite fun. Jose, thank you for this talk, and thank you for today, and for getting my mind racing again about things we talked about many years ago and today. And while I was walking around this wonderful institution with Alistair today, my mind returned to, I know, Jose, you'll remember this, back to 1994 when the EU commissioned the Bangerman report, which was going to structure the EU's response to this thing that was happening called the internet. The neoliberal response to that, it's a hard document to find now, and I'm not surprised why it's hard to find. The response was, we don't need to regulate it because the market will regulate it. And one of the things your talks reminded me of, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, we tend to look at things like the viable systems model as potential utopian impositions on a will that's just going on. And I think what your answers just reminded me of is that in that time frame, there have been wholesale changes to the rules of economics and commerce. One of the reasons why many big companies aren't socially responsible anymore is because they don't need to be. During the 80s and the 90s, most of the guide rails for what companies needed to do in order to be licensed were just taken away. What they could do, what they could buy, what they could sell, how they could treat their workers. So I think your talks really remind me that dichotomy, these aren't just one-way suggestions of how to change a system, the parent system, that the parent system itself over that period of time has undergone radical change, and it's so hard sometimes to see that, and if the system has been changed, then it could be changed again.
I would only say that it's this systemic perspective that we are missing, because I mean, if you think about, I mean, the UK industry, the manufacturing industry, that it has collapsed because it hasn't been thought at what else does that that industry generates besides certain output. So yeah, we lost that systemic perspective, which should be the perspective of governments.
And last word for me, I promise. I think we need to be very, very wary as well of those systemic changes that we kind of don't notice, that take away the possibility of diversity and discourse and choice from us. A very good example in the UK again was from 2010 onwards. Rules were changed to charity statuses. So most arts organisations, for example, in the UK, would be registered charities. And that came with a lot of responsibilities. And the government promised, you won't need those responsibilities anymore. We'll make you free to be much more like businesses. And of course, there wasn't a freedom. There was an imposition of a whole set of rules, and you know that you know very well, having lived for so long in the UK, that just ruined most charities. Most charities overnight turned into institutions which were constantly running after funding, and the people who were great at making art turned into fundraisers. And there are those kind of micro-fascisms, I think, that it's really important to take note of when you're reminding of us of these kind of beautiful ideas of how it could be otherwise.
But I suppose, I mean, one of the questions is, what could be done to unlock, to allow this much broader thinking, this holistic thinking to come back into play? What could the steps be? Would it be something that's at a high political level, or are there ways to model it, to demonstrate it? Because it seems that, like a lot of these stories, they're attempting to apply it and often failing in the end. But if you had a model that worked, that you could say, this is what it means, this is how it operates. Is that possible? Are there those success stories? Because I was also thinking of Enrique, who was one of the artists behind the multi-node metagame, now runs the MIM Center.
The Museum of Science, yes.
Yes. And actually,
Interactive Museum of Science.
And he was telling me he's actually modeled the management structure of the museum itself on a viable systems model. And whether maybe you've experienced that, to see if it actually works as a structural, organizational structure that works.
I think that we are, another thing that I think we are missing, and I think that Stafford Beer spotted that very well, is that we need to understand organizations as information flows. Not just as people, which are important. I mean, and the most successful projects of Stafford Beer were dependent on people, on certain people that I already mentioned. But I think it's important to understand which are the information flows, how we design the structures. We sometimes tend to think about the outcomes, but it's impossible to think from the outcomes inside. We need to really make structural changes, and especially understand what type of information do we need for what, how do we combine that information. So I think I think that the interesting thing about Stafford perspective, a little bit naive perhaps, was to understand organizations as information.
I wonder, even it's worth talking about what you were sharing with me today with our call with Lima, about where the museum is in a way applying this to run itself. Yeah. Maybe just describe that.
Well, it was an experience that happened from a tragic situation during COVID. The Museum of Art in Lima, as all museums closed, but the budget was reduced to nil, and there was of course an institutional crisis. There was no leadership at that time, so the team had to lead their own work, and I was helping them with the use of dashboards to guide them. So I mean, they were guided through the information, and from that bottom information that they created, that they started to look at the world picture, at the wider museum. But that required to not just to have the right information, but also to develop a culture, a data-driven culture. We talk a lot about data-driven culture today, but it's not just about that we should follow the data. The data is like a wide sea. The data helps us to spot things, and from then on, you need to dive down and understand and get, I mean, your insights, your ideas. And it's interesting because as we were discussing a few hours ago with the team in Lima, that broke the silos among the people there because they were sharing the same information, and it was not my information, your information, is information for the benefit of the objectives of the museum. And that not just broke the silos, but also created a natural horizontal organization. And yes, I mean, it's very much into the ideas of Stafford Beer, which is this bottom-up approach. But interestingly enough, what I find interesting is that, and that's why I wanted to spot that in the talk, is that this viable system model could be used also from a top-down perspective. And I think that some of the presidents that called Stafford Beer were also keen on using that as a tool for control, definitely.
I was also impressed in Lima that they don't have to write reports anymore, which was, yeah.
Which is connected to the idea of the ops room. So the ops room, when it was designed by Gibbon Siepe. Gibbon Siepe was he studied at the School, but was a disciple of Tomás Maldonado, one of the figures of the School, who was originally from Argentina. So there is all this connection, Argentina, Germany, back to Chile. When they designed it, the idea is that nobody could bring any type of paper. It's a moment for discussion, and you have the data there. Even though it was very rudimentary, because we are talking about a very sophisticated set of slide projections, but it was just that, slide projections. In the archive, Stafford Beer's archive, there are all these manuals about how to design this very intricate functionality that could be interesting to recover because the manuals are there, of slide projectors. Which may play a beautiful slide installation. But interestingly enough, there was no paper. And that, I think that's interesting also, because that promotes you not to write reports, not to think by yourself, but to discuss. And I think that this is one of the things that also we are lacking now.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, Stafford Beer, they say that he wanted to have a space where you can put a drink or a whiskey, whatever.
And a cigar.
And a cigar.
Tim?
Yeah, thanks so much for your talk. And as you just mentioned, well, this relationship also to Germany. And as we're here at ZKM and HfG, I'm wondering if you could say a few more words about this special relationship between HfG Ulm at that time and the influence and the exchange also with Latin America.
I cannot say that much. I haven't studied it in detail, but there were some few Latin American students at Ulm. With my colleague David Molen de los Reyes, both we are working on a history of cybernetics. We've been exploring some of these practitioners. Nevertheless, I would say that a prominent figure there was Tomás Maldonado. Tomás Maldonado came from Argentina. He met Max Bill, and that's how this connection started. And he brought some of the ideas around cybernetics to the school, but also about information design. So, I mean, I think once more, I haven't digged into the Ulm archives, but I'm pretty sure there are lots of very interesting connections. And once more, there are also connections from the other side, like Gibbon Siepe, who was the designer of the ops room, and he studied there. And And he was very close to Maldonado. And actually, there is also a very particular connection. Guy Siepe wrote a book on design, book on perspectives on design in Spanish, or I think it was in Spanish or Portuguese, and he asked for the prologue to Darcy Ribeiro. And I was struck, how did he knew about Darcy Ribeiro? So I asked Guy Siepe, who is in his 80s, and he told me that it was through Tomás Maldonado. Tomás Maldonado thought that Darcy Ribeiro was a very interesting person to do the prologue for the book of Guy. So once more, these are connections that sometimes we miss, but when we spot them, we say, I mean, there is something there going on. And
I think also there's a line that goes from Maldonado through Bauhaus into the Center for Advanced Visual Studies,
yes,
which is the inspiration for ZKM.
Georgi Kepes,
yeah,
and I mean, then there is another. There are Francesco Mariotti knows very well, but there are many artists from Latin America that were trained at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. Yes.
Nina.
Thanks a lot. I was a bit reluctant to ask a question because I came so late. Sorry for this. I just pick up some of the discussion that's ongoing, and also a question asked by Alistair before about a model that works. Thinking about cybernetic systems, of course, we always have to keep in mind that setting up a cybernetic system means defining which data goes in, and also what it means if we say it works, right? So I was wondering whether the imaginative potential of the Cybersyn project might precisely lie in the fact that it hasn't been fully implemented, and it leaves these gaps that leave space for imagination, dreaming, and thinking of all kinds of dimensions that could be kind of part of that system. And what your opinion is about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not just that it wasn't. I mean, not just that it wasn't possibly fully implemented. The technology, there were lots of limitations, but it worked. But also the military coup that dismantled the government of Allende, propitiated the death of Allende. I mean, the whole story is terrible. It's funny that the successful model, which was Urusip, is less known. But yeah, I mean, always when there is something that is a failed project in one way or the other, you always say, I mean, what would have happened with that? And I think that's idea of thinking about failure in a positive way, understanding that failure is also a possibility that didn't happen, and it's connected also to viable utopias, to possibilities, to potential ways of doing things, viable ways, not just mere dreaming. But yeah, and once more, at that moment, and it's very well explained by Stafford Beer, Stafford was already going from Cybersyn, which was a model for nationalized industries, towards a project that is more connected to empower people to participate in let's say in the democratic decision-making processes in Chile. He was thinking of using the TV the TVs that were produced in Chile as an interactive component to develop what he called a sort of an algedonic device. So he was already moving towards a much. He was much more interested in the political and the societal impact of these tools. Yes, but that never occurred. It was left as an idea.
Brazil had the video text tool, which was the television, interactive television tool, based on the Mini tool.
Wow.
No, it's good. Good important note. Annette.
What you are telling us is very moving, and especially this one phrase of the cover of the book, which said planning and participation. And this is very itchy to me, because we are talking about redesigning the system, and all of us enter in like, oh, we want to change the system, but it makes me super helpless. I'm not a designer, I'm not a data engineer. So where do visitors of ZKM, maybe curators, all of us enter into this process of where is planning and where is participation? Can we turn it around as well? Are we participating in the planning? Or, you know, I think it's super complex what you are showing to us, and I just can add to the voices who come to you and the stage and they say, well, where are concrete examples where, you know, can we start doing something?
Well, I mean, in a way, that's my thoughts with where this might go, right? The reason why we've invited José-Carlos here and John Byrne is here from Liverpool, where the Stafford Beer archive is, and that we are, you know, we're thinking now about our organizational structures in ZKM, and we're thinking in the museum sector about our organizational structures and how we relate to publics, and what is the role of places like ZKM in its context and its locality internationally and so on. So I think we should try and model things. We should try and experiment in these ways, and it might be in a small way. It might be in education, for example. You know, all these things. I always think, you know, you almost need to go back to school sometimes. There's a mathematician, Eugenia Cheng, who's quite interesting. She used to work in category theory, in the most abstract end of mathematics, and she kept saying, "Oh, I have to when I'm teaching it, I have to retrain my PhD students." And then she said, "Oh, I need to retrain the master's students." She ended up in primary school, teaching mathematics on a whole new level, and then ended up writing a book. And so it almost needs that level of rethinking how we do education as part of this as well, which is, for me also, I think something we could think about in terms of modeling a system. Like, what could we do here in terms of our mediation in education and working with schools? And that's why then if you look at the archive, it's quite interesting, because it's not just cybernetic diagrams in the archive. It's like, he made a children's book, right, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and Jose will have seen them as well. He made absolutely beautiful sort of cartoon drawings, over 5 or 6 pages of how you could upend top-down democracy to share, and it's based at everybody. It's not based at bureaucrats or people who can actually affect the system as you would think. It's based on how can we build a system that listens to everybody and adjusts almost to those kind of constant social vibrations. He was kind of, yeah, he's a very odd polymath. They are beautiful drawings.
I was going to say that there are vacant posts in senior positions at both institutions at the moment. Maybe we could replace them with the VSM.
Yeah, right. I just gonna ask you, can you speculate on, do you think that the decision making, how much did these kind of cybernetic experiments and system influenced decision making in an institution or in a state itself? Did the decision making function differently then? I mean, I found it very interesting that you described it needed not so much paper, you didn't have to write so many reports, there was more like visual, not so much text maybe, but more visualizations, more diagrams, I don't know, and more discussion. Is that influencing decision making? What do you think?
I'm not sure, but I think that there is something around social cohesion and solidarity that we are losing, and that perhaps that these models of rebuilding information and sharing information and also participating could invigorate. Yes, I think that that's something that has also been substantially diminished.
Tim?
Well, sorry to out me a bit as a historian, so but I think it fits very nicely to that discussion. I think just trying to draw exactly these relationships between in history, in the genesis of cybernetics, I think this would be quite helpful, because it shows you how all these ideas, well, are in continuous exchange in motion. So, and just is to getting away from a fixed static ideology. And I think one thing which is quite important, and which I missed a bit, to show up that there are two basic ideas in cybernetics. One is to this idea in machine-like networks. And, well, the clue on, well, especially in Chile, for instance, is to have a more kind of organic network, a biology-inspired kind of network. And I think this is also important to work out, because we, in Wiener's idea, we are talking about completely two concepts which are not completely compatible.
Yeah, it's just when you were mentioning the organic and biology aspect, I was thinking also about Maturana and Varela, autopoiesis, because it was during the same time, and sometimes we are clearing out certain things. So there was I mean, an autopoietic model, a model of how the organism works. It's very much in similar to some respect to the Bible system model. So, I mean, there are all these underlying or interlayering histories that definitely are, once more, I think it's very important to realize the context. Even if there are not direct connections, there might be some other incipient connections. But yeah.
Any more questions? Any more comments?
I don't know if it turned up, but I emailed you a couple of images of those cartoons. So, it's possible to let people see them. They might not turn up, but they're quite large.
I can try. Hold on 1 second. Try to.
Safety first.
Yeah, I mean, I need to check my email.
Data protection.
So the children's book?
There were just a series of cartoons to generally let people know about kind of changing their democratic conditions so they can be autonomous participants from the ground up. They're very beautiful, very remarkably succinct, and they're just nice things. Quite at odds with what you think would be in the archive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, his writing is quite poetic as well. I mean, it's kind of almost like a preacher. Yeah. But sorry, we did have a question here. Sorry, over on the sofa.
Thank you. I would like to comment or to reply on the previous question from the right-hand side. What we actually can do, or how we can start, and I think especially the city of Karlsruhe offers many opportunities for individuals to engage. I think in the exhibition on the other side of the atrium, there's a map of Karlsruhe with many initiatives where people take action and where people get together to do something for society. And I think this builds a certain spirit, and I think you can actually feel that spirit in Karlsruhe.
Thank you. It's also a pertinent point, because that's the reason why we're doing that, is we were discussing it today, is that the intention is working with those groups here at ZKM. What they want is an interconnected system. What they actually want to do as a project is to create a kind of a technological system that would help them coordinate and organize and involve people and allow people to participate. So that it is the seeds of growing something out of this, and the way that that exhibition is designed to work. So yeah, that might be the next the next step, or one of the next steps that we could experiment with.
You mentioned the bottom-up structure. This is one. Can we have some example from top-down? I mentioned that two.
Top-down approaches is when you have when you centralize the control in the hands of few people, and those people are the ones that give the orders. That's a top-down approach. I mean, management, vertical. I mean, hierarchical organizations, vertical organizations work like that. Yeah.
Elon Musk,
Twitter right now. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you look at the way Twitter, and also we can plug our exhibition that's opening tomorrow night, Choose Your Filter, which really shows you, when you look at that show, you realize the way that this is a world of artists working in how we access information in the digital age, and how that diverse field of possibilities and creativity has been reduced to the kind of oligarchs platforms we have now, and Twitter being a good example of that. That's a complete. There's not much that it's very controlled what goes through that and how that's controlled. So that in a way that's why this is such a relevant, important topic to be discussing now, more than ever before, when those possibilities for a social solidarity system has been really eroded. And so while we have to make a claim for it, we have to make sure these ideas are not lost. I think that's part of it. And also I think, for me, the artistry of it as well. So I'm thinking now about, we've talked about cybernetics and management and running countries and economic systems, but what's that got to do with art? But actually, if you look at Stafford Beer's work, and you had it listed as one of his many facets, he was an artist. But he was also an artist in the way he approached cybernetics.
Absolutely.
And we see it in other sides. We see it in Gordon Pask in the work we're restoring at the moment with the calligraphy of mobiles, or in Stephen Willett's. This interplay between artistry and computational applications developments is really key for it to work, and that's why I think it's such a key subject for certainly for us to be asking here at ZKM and trying to model, because in a way it's an artistic approach, because you're basically you're visualizing the world through systematic designs and principles and flows of information. And so yeah, I think maybe if we've run out of questions, we could possibly end on that note that this is art.
Yes.
But José-Carlos, thank you so much for coming.
A pleasure, really.
Yeah, and all our other guests, and for everybody for joining in. And thank you again, as always, to our technical team and for everybody who helped organize this event. Thank you.